It's entitled Touch and Heal Us. Most loving God, in whom we live and move and have our being, give us a new awareness of your presence. Touch our minds that we may know you in the word of Scripture and in the living word, Jesus Christ. Touch our ears that we may hear you in music and song. Touch our eyes that we may remember you in the signs of cross and candlelight. Touch our hearts that we may love you with a love that sweeps through us like a great tide. Living, loving Spirit of God, touch us with the spirit of love, joy and praise. Amen. I've entitled this morning's message, One of the Nine, because it occurred to me as I read through these words that often that's where you would find me, is one of the nine. It's interesting, isn't it, that suffering and difficulty often brings together unlikely companions. Have you ever been in that situation where you're in hospital for a few days and there in the ward with you there are 3 or 4 other people who probably you would never have met if it hadn't been for this shared experience of being in hospital together? And sometimes it's in that kind of situation where friendships are made that probably would never have been made otherwise. Conversations are had that probably would never have occurred in the general run of life. But because of this situation, you've been thrown together, and so you come into contact with different people. Suffering often draws together people who otherwise would never meet, or even more, perhaps would be opposed to one another, or even enemies. And that's certainly the situation as we look at those verses in Luke's Gospel today. Jesus is walking in that area between Galilee and Samaria. I wonder which way he was going. Was he going to travel through Samaria down to Jerusalem? Because he obviously did sometimes. We have accounts of him meeting Samaritans at Sychar. Or was he going to take the more favoured Jewish route and go out around the edge and back in again because you wouldn't even want to put your feet into Samaria? It's interesting that the Gospel tells us that he was walking in that area between the two. And this is where he comes across these 10 lepers. And it's a combination of Jews and Samaritans, and we all know that with the cultural differences, that in itself was unusual. But in being pushed aside by the community because they were lepers, they found this common ground, and so they walked together in this case. For the lepers, there were many rules and regulations that went with what they were allowed to do, where they were allowed to go, how they were allowed to do things. And that's before you even get to the just ordinary reluctance of people to have anything to do with you because they're afraid that they might get leprosy. It's said that if you weren't downwind of other people, then as a leper it was your obligation to stay up to 50 metres away from the other person. So this is not the lepers here and Jesus at the back there. They're a long way off. And keeping their distance, because if they hadn't kept their distance, the rest of the people would have very quickly let them know that they were doing the wrong thing. The other thing that really struck me as I read through this is, and the version that we had used the words, your faith has made you well. But there are actually a number of Bible translations that have, I'll dare to say, watered that down a bit and said, saved you. Isn't it interesting to think that it was the coming back and kneeling at Jesus' feet that actually made the big difference? And so here we are, these 10 lepers calling out. They have no hope. There is no possibility of turning around their situation. And yet when Jesus comes their way, they've heard enough about him to know that he might be the one that makes a difference. And so they call out to him and ask for his mercy. And Jesus turns to them and says, go and show yourselves to the priests. That, of course, was part of the Jewish regulations. If you were ill and you were to be healed, then the priest was the one who actually said, yes, you have been healed and you can come back into the community, you can come back into your family, you can resume your normal life. So it was a part of that process that Jesus was following as he says to them, go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they're on their way, suddenly they realise that they've been healed. The other 9 keep going, but this one man comes back and kneels down at Jesus' feet. The scriptures tell us that he shouted out loud his praises to God. He knew what had happened. He knew what a difference it was going to make to his life. But the first place that he stopped was with God to say thank you. And so Jesus blesses him and sends him on his way. I wonder what the other 9 did. Sometimes as we read through the scriptures and we come to a passage and we take a particular line, we don't always stop to think about the others who moved in a different direction. I wonder where they went, what they did. Who was it that they were rushing towards? Did they go to the priests? All these things we don't know. We just have this one man who turns back. And Jesus says, well, weren't there 10 of you? Where's the rest? And not only that, but you're actually the Samaritan. You're the foreigner. If anyone had been going to keep going in your own direction and not stop and say thank you to God, surely it would be the Samaritan. And yet he's the one who stops and gives thanks. My daughter works in a very stressful job. And there are days when she doesn't actually want to show up in the office. Quite a few days. And at its worst, we actually came up with this little thing that we do together where she will ring me and say, I don't want to go into the office today. Okay, come on. 3 things to be thankful for. And you know, once we've stopped and found 3 things to be thankful for, and sometimes that's a bit of a challenge depending on how the day is, somehow facing up to that difficulty is not quite as bad as it was before we started the conversation. Sometimes one of those things to be thankful for is that we've only got to find 3 things, because finding a 4th one would probably be more than we can cope with that day. It's actually been a real lesson to me, because there have been other times when it's been me who didn't want to go into a situation or didn't want to face up to something. And so she says to me, now come on, 3 things to be thankful for. Well, one, I've got you on the other end of the phone saying to me that I should be thankful, and that's a good thing. Do we do that in our ordinary lives? Do we stop and think of things to be thankful for? And particularly when the day may be difficult. Do we stop and try and think of things to be thankful for? I have another friend who has had difficulties with anxiety for many years. And when she's getting stressed, she'll say, okay, just a second, I need to stop and I need to hear 5 things. Try that sometime. To just stop and hear 5 things. And sometimes it might be a bird. Sometimes it might be the fan. I guess it's the fan of the organ over there that I can hear. I don't know. Oh, the air conditioning. Right, the air conditioning. But just that stopping and being aware can make such a difference. It's interesting that the psalm also reflects that idea of us coming to God when things are tough and then just moving on to the next thing without stopping to say thank you. And I'm certainly guilty of that. There are times when things are difficult, and so I pray and I ask God to do this or that, or hopefully I just ask him to do what he wants to do, because probably my idea wasn't a very good one anyway. But at the other end of it, rather than stopping and spending just as much time saying thank you, I just kind of wander on to the next thing, and it isn't until the floor looks a bit uncertain beneath my feet that I suddenly think, oh Lord, help me out of this. Is there anyone else in the room who can relate to that, or am I the only one? That's comforting. I can see a couple of heads nodding. It's so easy, isn't it, to just get caught along with the next thing. To be one of the 9 who rush off to the next thing without stopping to kneel at Jesus' feet. The Samaritan was the one who least of all could be expected to stop and say thank you. The Jewish men were the ones who should have stopped and given thanks to God, because they were supposed to know that this was God at work. Why is it that the ones who should be most grateful are often the last ones in the list? I deliberately chose to have us hear some of Naaman's story this morning instead of the alternate reading from the Old Testament, because it seemed to me that the two fit very nicely together. The verse just before the part that we read, of course, relates how Elisha says to Naaman, he doesn't even come out of the building. He just says from inside, go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman's horrified. The Jordan River? If you were just going to tell me to wash in the river, we've got really good rivers in Damascus. Why would I want to wash in the Jordan River? And he's really angry that the prophet hasn't even given him the time of day to come out and speak to him. I thought he'd come out and say some words and there'd be something impressive. And instead he just sends me down to that piddly river to wash in their dirty river. And Naaman's servant comes to him and says, Father, if the prophet had asked you to do something difficult, you would have done it immediately. Why is it that when he asks you to do something simple, you can't do it? And for me, that connected the dots between our story of the lepers and our own story. All God asks is that we receive his grace, that we live according to that grace, and that we share what we've found out about God with the people around us. But we don't want to just receive a gift. We want to be able to do something for it. If God asked us to do something difficult for our salvation, we'd be going, yes, I can do that. I can do that. But there's nothing any of us can do other than open our hands and receive what Jesus has already done for us. And having received so great a gift, how can we not stop and say thank you? How can we not allow that to change our hearts so that as we look at the people around us, we see them as just as worthy of this great gift as we are? And so to reach out and help them in their journey. I encourage you as you go home today to read over that gospel reading again. Just sit with it for a little while. Imagine yourself there in the dirt and the dust. Where would you find yourself in that story? What is it that Jesus might want to say to you on that dusty road, somewhere between Galilee and Samaria? Let's pray. Lord, we recognise a resonance with Naaman and our own response to your gift of grace. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to be able to do things for ourselves. We want to make the difference. And yet, the reality is that you've done everything for us. And all you ask is that we receive your gift. And that in receiving your gift today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after and the day after, that we allow that gift to change who we are, to change how we see the world, to change how we see our circumstances, to change how we respond to other people, so that our hands too pass on your gift. Help us to be people who receive your love and who allow that love to work in our hearts and lives.